Breakups are hard even when you know it's the right move. I've been trying to hold myself together after ending a 2.5-year relationship with my boyfriend. I don't really feel like going into detail. It wasn't messy or dramatic, we simply weren't a good match anymore, but that didn't make it any easier. Some days, it felt like every little thing reminded me of him. I'd been forcing myself to maintain no contact, telling myself that it was the healthiest way for both of us to move on. It was difficult though, really difficult. One of the things I missed most about us was playing pool together. It was our special thing. I'm a fairly good player, better than most, but my ex was amazing. On his good days, he could make trick shots as if it were nothing. 1 rail, 2 rail, bank shots, kick shots, combinations. I'm pretty sure he was even learning standard spins. We each had pool tables at home, but obviously, we were young and staying indoors every night wasn't ideal. When we did go out, we always chose places, usually bars, with pool tables available. We hated crowded bars with long waits for a table and shouting patrons, so we usually headed to quieter spots that attracted an older crowd. Dive bars with old, scuffed tables and sticky floors were our sweet spot. Obviously, you can't expect to find a regulation table in pristine condition at any bar, but the dive bars were a much better option than rowdy college bars. We were usually the youngest people there, but we didn't mind. At that point in our relationship, we had grown a bit tired of the typical college, let's get plastered every night, mentality. Besides, even though I'm somewhat shy, my ex was very charismatic and got along with anyone, and being experienced at pool didn't hurt either. A few weeks ago, I found myself missing that part of my life more than usual. It was a random Wednesday, though, so none of my friends were free. I didn't want to sit around the house feeling sorry for myself anymore, so I decided to head out to one of the bars we used to frequent. I told myself it wasn't about nostalgia, that I just needed to get out. Believe me, I'm not usually the type to go out on my own or have the confidence to do so, but I was feeling off that night. The bar was exactly as I remembered, dim lighting, worn-out stools, a jukebox in the corner. The familiarity was comforting, yet it stung. Memories flooded back and I nearly turned around and left right then, but I forced myself to stay. After grabbing a few drinks, I wandered over to one of the pool tables and started idly chalking my cue. I wasn't really sure what I planned on doing there, playing alone would have seemed a bit odd. Luckily, my question was answered when a guy walked over, maybe in his mid-20s, the only person in the room near my age. He leaned against the table and asked if I was up for a game. I nodded and told him to rack them up. He put some money in the slot and began racking the balls. I chuckled to myself as he racked them incorrectly, but I kept quiet. We played a few rounds and I began to relax. He wasn't as skilled as my ex but wasn't terrible either. I wasn't going to go easy on him, though. I won every rack we played. We chatted as we played, and he even bought me a couple of drinks. He was friendly enough, but it quickly became clear he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. I like quick-witted and sharp guys who can hold a conversation, but this guy wasn't that. Still, I didn't mind. It felt good to simply play and talk without overthinking things for once. I was having a nice time until after the 4th game he asked if I wanted to go back to his place. That question took me by surprise, though maybe I shouldn't have been shocked. I froze for a second before shaking my head, trying to joke that he'd need a second date for that. Honestly, I just didn't want to move too quickly. I wouldn't have been entirely opposed to more with him, but not on a random Wednesday night. I guess I didn't do a good job turning him down, because his whole demeanor changed, his smile vanished and he began scowling at me. I wasn't ready for what happened next. He said, "Are you serious?" and grabbed my wrist while complaining about spending all that money on drinks. Before I could reply, he snatched my purse too. I had never been in such a situation, so instead of screaming or fighting back, I just froze. Even though we were in a public place, I was terrified. Fortunately, a couple of older men at the bar noticed what was happening and stepped in. Honestly, I'm not sure what I would have done if they hadn't, as one of them told the guy to let me go. The man glared at me, mumbled something under his breath, and tossed my purse back onto the table before storming out of the bar. My heart was still racing, and I thanked those men profusely for helping me out. That was it for me. I called an Uber and left the bar, still shocked and trying to process what had just occurred. I decided to close my eyes in the Uber and must have fallen asleep because the next thing I remember is the driver gently waking me up. We were parked across the street from my house. I thanked him, got out of the car, and began walking toward my door while rummaging through my bag for my keys. On impulse, I checked my phone for the first time since leaving the bar, and that's when I saw it, a god-awful notification that an AirTag was found moving with me. I nearly dropped my phone. My hands started shaking as I rifled through my purse, tossing aside my wallet and makeup, until my fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. I pulled it out and stared in disbelief. There was literally an AirTag in my bag. A wave of panic hit me, even worse than earlier. I was still standing in the middle of the street, so I threw it on the ground and stomped on it several times until I was sure it was broken. I stifled a scream and began breathing heavily. The cold wasn't helping. I needed to get inside. I looked around frantically, but the street was completely empty. Whoever had planted the AirTag probably knew exactly where I was, maybe not my exact house but certainly my street, since the houses here are large and spaced out, so he could narrow it down. I grabbed my purse and sprinted to the back door, fumbling with the lock before finally getting inside. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I was safe, but I couldn't stop shaking. I walked up to my room, wondering how I'd gotten myself into such a mess. Normally, I'm asleep by 10, out cold for 9 or 10 hours, but there was no way I was going to sleep that night. I looked out my bedroom window, thinking maybe the view would help me drift off, and as I gazed mindlessly, I noticed an old beat-up Lincoln slowly driving past my house. Nothing too odd at first, though it was a bit late for cars on a residential street, but then it came back from the opposite direction, and I knew something was off. It passed even slower the second time, as if the driver was scanning the houses. I didn't want to face the reality of it, but when it passed the third time, I had no choice. It had to be him, trying to find my house. I wanted to scream again, and the next time the car passed, the driver's side window was rolled halfway down. I considered calling the police but didn't want that guy to know he was close. I know that sounds strange, but I was so scared I couldn't think clearly. The next time, the driver's hand was hanging out the window holding something that looked like a knife, and then, instead of driving past, the car stopped in the middle of the road right across from my house. I ducked down, my heart pounding a million beats a minute. I stayed crouched below the window, too terrified to move, and by the time I looked up, the car was gone. I waited for what must have been an hour, but it didn't return. The next morning, I told my parents everything. My dad scolded me for not calling the police, but I explained I was too scared to do so. He then called a buddy of his, a police chief, to ask for advice. His friend said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence or the car's plate number, which I hadn't seen. The friend advised us to call the police immediately if we ever saw that car again. I didn't leave the house for days, and even now I'm really scared that he's waiting somewhere to see me enter or exit my home. I haven't seen the car since, though, so maybe the nightmare is over. I don't live the most exciting life, but it's comfortable. I'm 40, single, with no kids. Some might call that depressing, but I don't mind. I have a steady job, a decent house, and no one to answer to but myself. I work as a bartender at a high-end rooftop bar in a neighboring town, serving clientele who consider regular bars beneath them. I don't live near that level of luxury myself. My place is in a pretty average neighborhood about 20 minutes away, but working there has its perks. The tips are amazing, as people in that area aren't shy about spending money, and the rotating crowd keeps things interesting. Since the bar is upscale, we don't have the typical regulars you'd find in a dive. I like that. I never cared for how close some customers got with me or any other bartender. Maybe that's just my nature since I prefer keeping to myself. I should mention that my name is Kevin. That will be important later. It was a Friday night, our busiest night, and the place was packed as usual with groups of friends clinking glasses, couples on dates, and a few folks who probably wandered in just to feel important. I always like to play a mental game with my patrons, trying to figure out which ones are pretending to be someone they're not. You can tell a lot about people by the way they order a drink. The ones who ask for complex cocktails are usually trying to impress someone, while those who order a neat whiskey seem like they've had a long day. I had my eye on a couple at the end of the bar who were down to their last sips of wine. It's always best to offer a refill before they signal you. I was in my groove, mixing drinks and chatting with customers, when I noticed someone walk in who definitely looked out of place. I recognized him immediately. He was clenching his teeth and scowling as if he were furious. He had messy jet black hair that sat on his forehead like a bird's nest. He wore a plain black hoodie under a faded leather jacket that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years, with stains all over it, but nothing was as unsettling as his face. He just looked incredibly angry. He headed straight for the bar but didn't sit down, he just stood there staring at me. I wondered how he had even gotten past the lobby's security. I cleared my throat and asked if I could get him a drink, keeping my tone neutral despite the strange vibe he was giving off. He didn't answer right away, which was odd. He just glared at me as if he were about to strike. Finally, he mumbled that he wanted a double shot of Jäger. I nodded, grabbed a glass, and poured the shot, even though we rarely serve Jäger here, since most patrons ask for something a bit higher in quality. I wasn't about to question his taste. I set the glass before him and moved on to serve other customers. When I returned to charge him, he had tossed crumpled cash onto the counter, which also threw me off since hardly anyone pays in cash at this place. Still, it wasn't my place to judge, so I rang him up and was ready to move on when he spoke again. I still remember his exact words, "I knew I'd find you here, Kevin." I froze, my eyes widening as I scrambled to process his statement. I set down the glass and demanded to know how he knew my name, keeping my voice low so as not to create a scene, yet hoping he understood how serious I was. He didn't answer my question. Instead, he just stared at me with the same angry intensity. Finally, he said, "I know what you did," before I could ask for clarification. He then turned and walked toward the elevators. I wanted to yell or chase after him, but I decided against it since I was on the clock and couldn't neglect my job. I just stood there, completely thrown off, confused beyond belief. I didn't recognize him at all, nor could I think of anything I had done to deserve such a cryptic remark. I'm no saint, but I don't go around making enemies. It put me in a sour mood for the rest of the night. When my shift finally ended, I drove home still unable to shake the thought of what had happened earlier. I racked my brain for any explanation that might make sense, but nothing came to mind. By the time I went to bed, I was still quite unsettled by the whole encounter. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly, not because I needed the bathroom, as I usually sleep straight through, but because something woke me up. I didn't hear or see anything, but I felt something was off. Without moving, I kept my eyes open, letting them adjust to the darkness. After about a minute, I saw something that filled me with a rush of fear, a dark mass in the corner of my room next to the door. It was just standing there, yet I was absolutely sure it didn't belong. I felt my heart start to race, but I forced myself to remain still, pretending to still be asleep. "Someone is in my room," I repeated silently several times before fully realizing it. I knew I had to act, so I counted to 3 silently and then jumped out of bed, screaming like I was losing it. I was ready to fight, but the figure didn't move toward me. Instead, he bolted for the door, and I heard something clatter to the floor. I chased after him through my house, but by the time I reached the front door, it was wide open and the intruder was gone. I wanted to run out into the yard to search for him, but I feared I might walk straight into a trap. Instead, I did what I still believe was the smart choice. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I recalled the clatter I had heard earlier in my room, and when I returned, I turned on the light and froze. There was a knife lying in the corner on the floor, one of mine taken from the kitchen. I felt sick. Whoever I had just chased was planning to hurt me, maybe even kill me. I called the police right away, and they quickly arrived, searching both my house and yard but finding nothing. I gave them a description of the man from the bar, and they obtained the video footage from my workplace, yet they haven't been able to find him since. What scares me most is that I know for sure I had locked all my doors that night. I locked them every night, and during their search, the police never discovered how that man managed to get inside, since none of the windows were broken or left unlocked, and there was no sign of forced entry. To this day, I still have no idea how he got in, and I haven't seen him since, though I often wonder if he's waiting somewhere, ready to see me enter or leave my house again. I work as a bartender at a bar and restaurant in a suburb just outside Baltimore. I'll explain the layout so the story makes sense. It's a busy place with a very unique setup. There are no waiters here, just bartenders like me and the cooks in the back. If you want food or non-alcoholic drinks, you order them at the bar, and once they're ready, you pick them up from the counter. I'm not exactly sure why they run it that way, but I guess it has something to do with management trying to cut costs by not hiring waiters. Either way, it keeps things moving quickly, which I actually enjoy. The place is very popular even though I personally don't think it's anything extraordinary. The atmosphere is lively most nights, with great music, a buzzing crowd, and a standing area by the DJ booth where people gather to dance and chat. The constant stream of customers and the high-energy vibe make the workday fly by. I love meeting and talking to new people, so the job is perfect for me. I'd probably go crazy if I had long lulls between serving guests. I'm sure some people might enjoy a slow night, but that's just not for me. That particular night began like any other weekend. It was busy, and I was ready as the bar began filling up with a younger, college-aged crowd, which meant more dancing, more spills, and a rowdier atmosphere overall, not to mention worse tips for me. A group of kids kept ordering round after round of tequila shots faster than I could line up the salt and limes. It's always chaos when they take over. One of them was so wasted that he hit on me with the same pickup line 3 times while I was darting around doing my job. Then I noticed an elderly couple walk in and sit in a booth in the corner of the restaurant. At first, there was nothing odd about them. I just found it interesting that 2 people their age would choose a rowdy place like this. I didn't have much time to think about it, so I got back to work. About 30 minutes to an hour later, while I was halfway through pouring a line of gin and tonics, I noticed the couple again. Even though my hands were busy on autopilot, my mind couldn't stop fixating on them. That's when it hit me, they were just sitting there, completely motionless. They hadn't ordered anything, not even a drink or a bit of food that I remembered. I looked closer and realized they weren't even glancing at each other, they were both fixed on the wall beside them. From what I could tell, they didn't seem to be talking either. It was the strangest sight, and I was beyond curious, but the bar was hectic and I had too much to do to linger. I assumed they might be waiting for someone or perhaps didn't understand how the place worked. When I finally got a break, I decided to check on them myself. I walked over to the table and put on my politest smile as I approached, but neither of them turned to face me, they both continued staring at the wall like statues. I cleared my throat and asked if they wanted anything to eat or drink. The woman didn't even flinch, she kept gazing at the wall as if I hadn't spoken at all. The man slowly turned his head as if moving in slow motion, and when his face came into view, I felt a chill run through me. His skin was pale and wrinkled, and his eyes looked almost sunken into his face. He didn't say a word, he just stared at me and then shook his head firmly, though silently. There was something about the way he looked at me that made my stomach twist. I mumbled a reply and quickly returned to the bar. I had the strangest feeling in my gut after that. Those people looked like they didn't belong in this century, let alone in my bar. I didn't glance at that booth for long, and eventually, as things started to die down, I remembered the couple I'd impulsively looked at, and I nearly dropped the glass I was holding. Both of them were now staring directly at me. I made direct eye contact with the woman, and she didn't look away. I don't think I've ever felt more uncomfortable at work than I did in that moment. I looked away, pretending to be busy, trying hard not to completely freak out. When I looked back, the booth was empty. I felt a wave of relief, glad that they were gone, even if it sounds unkind. By the end of the night, I was still haunted by the incident as I wiped down the bar and closed up with my coworker Karen. I decided to ask her if she'd seen anything odd. Karen is what you'd call a veteran here. She's worked at the place for years and prides herself on noticing every detail about everyone who walks in. When I mentioned the couple, she gave me a confused look and said she didn't know what I was talking about. I stared at her blankly and clarified that I meant the elderly couple in the corner booth. She shook her head and told me she hadn't seen anyone like that, then jokingly asked if I was hallucinating, which made me laugh nervously, though inside I was unraveling. I knew what I had seen, and when I asked her again if she was sure, she crossed her arms and listed at least 10 random people who had ordered food that night along with what they were wearing. I laughed again and complimented her memory, but deep down, I was still shaking. By the time we locked up, as I walked to my car, I noticed something that made me nearly drop my keys in fear, a pair of dark figures standing under a lone street light across the street. I knew it was them. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Without waiting another second, I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and sped out of the lot without another glance. The drive home was awful. I was fighting to keep from breaking down, just repeating, "Oh my God," over and over in my head. I had so many questions. Had Karen missed something? Were those people even real? Was I going insane? I couldn't explain it. I felt like I was losing my mind. I wish this story had a proper ending, but it doesn't. I never saw those people again, and I never got any explanation.